Al Horford played nearly 40 minutes in game three against the Cleveland Cavaliers. He struggled on offense, played well on defense despite popular opinion. Is it time to be worried? All this and more on today's Celtics Chronicle. Yo, it's good, everybody. I'm joined by my boy, Mr. Tim Shields. We used to run the Vitamin C's podcast together. He was a co-host with me over at Celtics Pod when we were doing that podcast before SB Nation closed down that feed. How you doing today, Tim?
Doing all right, man. Feeling pretty good going into game 4 with the Celtics. So excited. Good
Yeah,
stuff.
me too, man. Let's play a game tonight. Before then, though, and this is just a quick one, we only wanted to spend like 10, 15 minutes on this subject. And the reason for that is because I think any more than that, we're just going to be rehashing the same subject. And I didn't want to go too deep into any conversation points that could potentially become outdated within the next 12 to 14 hours. So the question is Al Horford, I wouldn't say washed, but is his age starting to show? Right. And the reason people are asking this question, and the reason I feel like this is a good conversation, is he turns 38 in 20 days. June 3rd, he'll be 28. Sorry, 38. He's 3 years older than Joe Mazzulla. He's spent the entire season coming off the bench as a backup, right? He's played spot starts when Porzingis has been out. Back to backs have been kind of Porzingis sits night one, Al sits night two, Al plays in night one, and you see how that goes. But all of a sudden, we've come into the postseason. You get through to game 4 of the Heat series. Porzingis pulls up with a right soleus strain, non-contact injury. And now all of a sudden, Horford's being thrust into this bigger role, and it's starting to look like his legs are getting a little bit heavy, right? Especially on offense, where he went 1 of 7, I think it was, in game 3 on Saturday, or 0 of 7, 1 of 7. He had 2 points. That's a concern when you need him to be a two-way threat. Now, there was a lot made about his defense as well, but before we go into that, I want to let you have some oxygen here and just give me your thoughts about what you're feeling.
I think at the point where we're at with Horford right now, you're asking him to do a lot more than he probably should be doing, not even just considering his age, but considering the fact of you managed his minutes as well as Porzingis's during the season. Now, the reason why you went out and you got Xavier Tillman at the trade deadline and you've got Luke Cornett as your third big is so you can kind of manage those minutes at the 4 and 5. Obviously, that becomes a lot more difficult when you don't have Porzingis into the equation. So you're leaning on Al Horford to do a lot. And like you said, he's turning 38 soon. So you have to consider that into the equation of how much can this guy handle. So expecting a lot from him offensively, I think is a bad idea. You do want the 3 ball to be there a little bit more, but I think more than anything right now, you're starting to see him show his age, which is okay. But how do you try to mitigate that? Do you throw Xavier Tillman out there a little bit more? Does he get more run? Does that allow Al Horford to get a little bit more of a breather? How does this impact your rotations moving forward out of this series? Because you still don't know exactly when Porzingis is coming back. So I think that's really like the biggest focus, why Horford's age in particular right now is coming into the limelight. But I'm hoping that we see a little bit more usage of Luke Cornett, honestly, because I think Cornett kind of earned that third big spot. He's doing the right things, and it'll make it a little bit easier for Al Horford. But am I concerned about Al a little bit right now? I would say yeah, but not more than I was before. It's just, I think at this point now, Father Time has started to catch up with a little bit, but the man's almost 38 years old. Like, this might, if they Celtics do what they're supposed to do, this very well might be his last season, but people really aren't talking about that.
My biggest concern with putting, and I'll get back to the retirement thing. My biggest concern with putting Cornett in that rotation on bigger minutes is that this doesn't feel like a series for him in terms of, do you feel comfortable with him being hunted in the pick and roll and then having to stay in front of Donovan Mitchell? Do you feel comfortable with him being in the pick and roll and staying in front of Darius Garland, who's super twitchy, can change direction at pace, he can control his own pace? I feel comfortable about him being on Mobley, but even then, Mobley's quite mobile. Mobley is mobile. So it's tough, right? I think Tillman makes more sense for me there personally, just because it gives you a kind of like for like replacement with Horford. You can still switch 1 through 5. You've still got some form of physicality on the block. You've still got somebody that can operate on the perimeter in terms of a willing shooter. I know Tillman's been trying to get those perimeter jumpers up. He's not really being consistent, but neither is Al. So, what are you losing there, really? I do like Luke as a pick and roll defender in terms of containing ball handlers. But Donovan Mitchell, especially with that, like if you watch him come off a pick and roll, he'll use an escape dribble to the right, or if he comes off to the left, he'll escape dribble to the left. And he'll literally just take one escape dribble away from the defender because that pulls the big away from the middle of the floor and it opens up the passing lane where he can hit his own roll man. So that one escape dribble can really manipulate the way the defense is played. I feel much more comfortable with Tillman recovering there than what I do with Cornet, just because of the hip flexibility, the foot speed, the lateral quickness. Cornet is a drop big. If you're manipulating that to pull him 2-3 steps outside of the paint, and then you're hitting a pass to an Evan Mobley or a whoever's in that pick and roll, maybe as an inverted screener, maybe a Karis LeVert, whoever, and you're hitting that pass, and now you're expecting Cornet to kind of flip his hips and recover in time. That's going to be difficult. I feel much more comfortable there with an Al Horford or a Xavier Tillman. And that's one of Donovan Mitchell's best assets in that pick and roll in terms of creation, is just that he comes off, he'll face you up, he'll go into a dribble package and he'll escape dribble and pull a big, and then boom, he's got that passing angle straight there. That's a big issue for me in terms of just keeping Cornet on the floor. But it's where Horford has been really good at defending that during this series. If you look at his game in game 3, I know that it looked like Mitchell was cooking him, but he really wasn't. Like, he was hitting contested shots. Horford defended him on 11 shots. Mitchell went 6 of 11. 10 of those 11 were tightly contested or very like closely contested. Horford had a hand in his face on pretty much every shot, even where there was a possession where Mitchell went with a step back, Horford kind of stuttered back and then recovered and still got his hand in that release pocket. So I'm not saying that Horford's playing bad defense. What I'm saying is you need somebody behind him you can trust to bring those minutes down from 38 back around to 32. I know you was looking at some minutes before we came on, so I thought you might want to break them down here.
Yeah, I know for a fact his minutes have gone up, specifically since you lost Porzingis. Right now, as of May 3rd, he's averaging close to just under 32 minutes a game, and he got to what, about 40 minutes in game 3, correct? Yeah, so like a heavy workload right there when you're looking
Well, it was
at it.
around about 38 minutes, 38-22.
Which is a lot, and I think you hit it on the head there when you talk about Xavier Tillman and what he's able to do. You get a far higher likelihood of being able to replicate Al Horford's defense, and like you said, I don't think Horford's defense is the issue. It's just you're playing him a lot, you're asking a lot of him, and you're trying to make up the difference that you lost with Porzingis on the offensive end. Boston's offense very much predicated on their bigs and them being able to knock down threes and space the floor. Tillman's not giving you that right now. Cornet hasn't ever really given you that. When he first came to Boston, he actually shot threes, but he hasn't since. But I think when you look at skill set, I think you do need to start leaning more towards Tillman, at least in this series, because of that threat. I think Donovan Mitchell and the way he's able to just cook guys, regardless of what the coverage is. He was incredible in game 3. I know that they lost that game, but what an insane shooter from 3. And if you have to worry about the mismatches there with bigs getting pulled out into coverage, yeah, I don't like the idea of Cornet getting pulled up on like a switch. Like I don't love that at all. And I think that's where you really have to tip your cap to Horford, because I think he's doing a lot more than people expected him to do in the playoffs. Everyone knows that Al is a playoff performer. He steps up. He provides some very necessary minutes for the Celtics, but I think this is a bigger workload than they expected him to have. I think they were always afraid of what might happen with Porzingis, and now you have to manage Horford's minutes again. So it's a sticky situation. I think Tillman might be their best route in terms of trying to lessen that workload, but it what's the ideal minute count that you want? Do you really want Horford around 32 minutes, or do you want it a little bit lower for a little while? Like,
I'd
what are
say
you
anyway.
feeling?
I think that you go based on the flow of the game, based on what the game needs. I feel like if you put an arbitrary number out there and say stick to this number, life doesn't work like that in general. So it's definitely not going
No.
to work like that on a basketball court.
Mhm.
So I like to look at it in ranges. Like if you can stick within this range, we're in a comfort zone. Horford's fresh enough to make a solid impact on both ends of the floor. His legs aren't going to get too heavy, and you can obviously avoiding injury, like barring injury, you can sustain this level of in like intensity throughout the playoffs. And that would be for me anywhere between that 27 to 32 minute range, ideally keeping it on the lower end, 28, 29, around that like area there would be perfect for me. But you need to have a reliable big man coming off the bench that fits the system that you're playing while also gives you good minutes against the personnel that you're up against. And that's where I feel like Tillman fits this series better, just because of his mobility, the fact that you are kind of saying, right, we're taking one five that can switch out and we're putting another five that can switch in. We're kind of moving away from this drop defense for this series as much as we can, because Garland and Mitchell can both score off floaters. They can both take one dribble pull ups. Levert can cook you off the dribble. Okoro's no joke. He can drive closeouts. You need that secondary switch, and then you need that help defense coming in from the weak side. I feel for me, that would be a nice range where I'd be like, I'm comfortable with Horford playing at 27 to 32 minutes a night. I don't know where you're sitting there, but for me, that feels like a very comfortable number.
I think that's a reasonable number. And I think if you're trying to get Tillman into the equation, that's the best way to do it, is to start subbing in some minutes there, because the switching is really what worries me. There was a one point in time in the last game, in game 3, where I think it was Drew was guarding Donovan Mitchell and tried to go underneath on a screen, and Donovan just drained it from deep. So like, I worry about those kind of things where you have the bigs in mismatches like that, because this is the real challenge that the Cavs pose, especially when they don't have Jarrett Allen, because honestly, Jarrett Allen would have the ability to really sway this series, especially with Kristaps Porzingis sidelined. But right now, they're focusing on their shifty guards, how fast Donovan and Garland is. And Garland's not having a great series right now, but he's still very capable of tacking mismatches. So if you give them the opportunity to go against a Luke Cornett in drop defense or something like that, then you're just setting yourself up to get burned. And I think by using Tillman a little bit more, it gives them a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more mobility. It's just big thing for them right now defensively is to just keep up the intensity, because I think this is one of those matchups where the bigs are going to get tested. And I think having the depth that they've had has allowed them to survive this Kristaps Porzingis injury. But you also have to start thinking about beyond this series too. So you don't want to burn Al Horford out for this series, because you still don't know when Porzingis is coming back exactly. And if you burn out Al, or if he's got tired legs, how is he going to look like in whatever potential Eastern Conference matchup comes up, if whether it be the Knicks or the Pacers? And then you have to look out west. You know, you don't want to look past the Cavaliers by all means, but you still have to game plan. Okay, we can't empty the tank against the Cavaliers. Not only should we not empty the tank against the Cavaliers, but we can't afford to do that with Horford. We have to manage his minutes. So from like a Celtics coaching perspective, Joe's got to figure out what the minute workload is going to look like. But I think 27 to 32 for Horford is not only reasonable, but if they include Tillman in the equation in terms of those rotations, that's very achievable.
I think as well, if you look over, you only have to look over at New York to see the downside in overplaying guys, playing them too many minutes. They look exhausted right now. If you watched that game yesterday, they were all on heavy legs. They were running on fumes. And that's going to be another aspect that Missoula has to kind of carry. I was listening, well, I listened to some of it because a chat that, someone pointed it out on a podcast between Ryan Rossillo and Bill Simmons. I won't say Ben Simmons then. Neither one are very good at basketball, apparently. But they were talking about maybe potentially moving Tatum to the 5 and using Tatum as an option at that 5 spot. If you're not comfortable with Cornette, if you're not really comfortable with Tillman, maybe you move Tatum to the 5 and you bring O'Shea Brissett into the rotation, just for example, right? And I'm paraphrasing this conversation that they had. But that makes sense too, right? Because Tatum's already guarding Mobley on some of these actions. He's starting his matchup based on Mobley. Tatum can play the 5 on offense because the 5 in Boston's system just stands at the top of the perimeter and shoots threes. Tatum is a better catch and shoot free shooter than he is an off the dribble shooter, as are most NBA players. It's always harder to score off the dribble from deep than it is to score off the catch. That's an option. And then you're injecting more physicality and more force there with Brissett, who's just a whirlwind. He's kind of like Aaron Neesmith, but not as good. You've got that there. That's an option. So I'm not saying that they should do that. What I'm saying is you're not just confined to, oh, it's Nemi, Luke, or Tillman. There are other ways you can get creative and move Tatum there for stretches, maybe. But the problem with doing this, and I will stress this, you have to alter your entire sub patterns because now Tatum and Horford can start together, but they have to mirror each other for a lot of that time. And you're losing the benefit of having them together. So while that makes sense in a vacuum, it makes sense on paper. In terms of actually putting that into play, a lot needs to change. Your combinations change, your substitution patterns change, how you utilize Tatum. When does he play the four? When he slides up, how many minutes into his, like, say, checks in and he's got a 5 minute spell coming before he goes back to the bench, or a 10 minute spell? How many minutes in before you slide him up or slide him back down? What's the trade off in terms of the additional physicality he's going to face? There's a lot that you have to go through and speak to people about. So I do think that that's an option, but it's not one that needs to be taken as easily as, oh, we're just going to plug him in and it's going to be fine. No, it changes quite a bit. But in the grand sense of, hey, you're not confined to these other three backups. There is a fourth option. There is a different way about this. I like that because it's changing the equation. It's changing the approach. Personally, I'm not worried about Al Horford right now. I just think there needs to be a bit of an alteration in how he's being used in terms of minutes, and there needs to be an acceptance that, and this should be an acceptance for anyone that's been following Al Horford with the Celtics, he's not always going to be an offensive threat, because that's not his game. As long as he's giving you the defense and he's being that connective tissue, and he's not showing signs of fatigue or injury, which he was showing signs of fatigue at the end of game 3, then you should be very confident that he can play that role. He was the starting big on that run to the 2022 finals. So I'm comfortable. I just want them to find ways to keep him a little bit fresher.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, trying to do any kind of big alterations rather with the rotations is not necessary. The idea of throwing Tatum at the 5 is definitely cool. Those small ball lineups are always kind of fun to watch, especially when they get out and run. It lets you play a lot faster, which you can run guys off the floor. With this Cleveland team in particular, with Mobley out there, they've got some really athletic bigs, so you have to really think about that. But again, if it's going to impact you negatively in other spots, maybe you try something different. Maybe you do look at it O'Shea Brissett. I think about when they had Lamar Stevens at the 5 or something when they were really shorthanded one night. You could always do something like that, but it's not necessary in all situations.
And it doesn't need to be a consistent thing, right? It can just be a dice roll, a curveball, as Missoula spoke.
Gerald Green at the 5, game 5 against the Bulls or something like that.
Yeah, you just throw it out there for a 4 or 5 minute spell. And then you don't need to do all the adjustments I just spoke about. You're not worried about changing patterns or anything like that. You've just rolled the dice. And if it works, now we can incorporate it in the next game and so forth. And if it doesn't work, well, shit, we probably only tried it because we're up 15. So let's just get back up 15. You know what I'm saying? So I'm pretty chill with it, to be honest with you. I wouldn't mind seeing it, but I'm also not too concerned if they stay away from it.
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of keeping Horford fresh. And however they choose to do that, as long as it's effective and they keep winning games, that's really all that matters to me.
And with that, if you are not subscribed to the Celtics Chronicle newsletter, you're going to miss out on a newsletter being sent out in around about an hour from time of recording, 30 minutes from when this drops, where I'll be going into a bit more of this. I'll be showing some clips from Horford's defense on Mitchell, talking a bit more about that, talking a bit more about the rotation. Make sure you sign up. Links in the description. Make sure you follow me over on Instagram and Twitter. And obviously, you got to show Tim some love. Tim, where can they find you?
You'll find me over on Twitter right now at Tim Shields NBA.
Because we're very creative with our handles over here. I'll be back later in the week, probably tomorrow, maybe Wednesday, but I'll be back. And everybody, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button, leave a comment, let me get to know y'all, and I'll catch you soon. Peace.
Cheers.